Hello everybody, welcome to another episode here of The Sky Tonight. My name is John, I'm one of the Planetarium Educators at the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Daytona Beach, Florida. And what we're looking at today is the sky from September 7th to the 13th. So as we set the sky here, you'll notice the sun getting farther and farther off to the southwest and then disappearing off screen to go set in the west there. But as we set the sky here, you can begin to see more of the stars and even some constellations and planets that we are going to talk about here tonight for this recording. So to start off here, we'll talk about Jupiter. So zooming in here, you can see that Jupiter has 4 moons that we can actually see with a telescope there. You can't see them with your naked eye, but you can see Jupiter there. And you can also see the banding of the cloud layers there on the planet. And we can also see just there, sort of in that southern hemisphere there, the most iconic feature of Jupiter, which is that great red spot. Now, the great red spot is a hurricane, essentially. So if you've lived in Florida for a while, I guarantee you've probably experienced a hurricane at least once in your life. But this image here shows the Juno probe that flew past Jupiter in 2016 and took beautiful pictures of the planet and told us a lot more about the storm itself. And we actually know that the storm is sort of shrinking. It was first discovered by Galileo, as well were these moons. So Galileo again could only see these 4 moons, but one of the moons that is my favorite is this moon here called Europa. Now, the reason that Europa is a favorite of mine is that it's the best place in our solar system when it comes for searching for life. So it might not look like much here on the surface, the white icy outer layer with these red scarrings on the surface. It almost looks like the moon is sort of bleeding there. But the red stains on the ice itself are actually clay and mineral deposits left over from geysers that break the ice and spew up hundreds of thousands of kilometers into the atmosphere there. And so the estimate is that about 60 meters below that ice, there is a liquid water ocean where life could be teeming around those geothermal volcanic vents at the bottom. So rather than using the process of photosynthesis, where organisms take in the light of the sun to create their energy, chemosynthesis takes the chemicals and the heat from those vents at the bottom of the ocean to convert that into energy. So Jupiter is a lot more interesting than you might give it credit for if you just look at it tonight and didn't know any better. So moving right along here, the next planet that we're going to talk about is Saturn. So Saturn is the second largest planet of our solar system, and obviously the most iconic feature that you can see here is that ring system that surrounds the planet. Now, Jupiter also has rings, but we can't see them because they're very thin. But Saturn not only has larger rings than Jupiter does, but it has more moons as well. It has about 82 moons around it, whereas Saturn only had about 85 or so. A lot of the moons, though, are unconfirmed, and they estimate it to be closer to 100 swirling around Saturn itself. Now, obviously, the ring system here is the most beautiful and most widely known feature of the planet, but my personal favorite feature is the hexagon storm at one of its poles. So the hexagon storm is really just a process creation from its rotation and the winds, similar to the jet streams that we have here on Earth. Now, jumping back to those rings here, these rings span outwards from the planet hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and they are very thin, honestly, all things considered. They're primarily made up of water ice particles, ranging in size anywhere from the size of a golf ball to about the size of a Volkswagen van. But like I said, they're very thin, even though they span outwards hundreds of thousands of kilometers there. And if you were to drive through them in a car, you would probably reach the other side in about 30 minutes or so. They're pretty thin, all things considered there. So switching over here to talking about the eastern part of the sky now, we can see that Mars is not far from the horizon itself. And we'll get into talking about the constellations here in a minute, but let's talk about Mars first. So zooming in a little bit, we can now see the two moons of Mars, as well as that beautiful brownish red color that the planet is known for. So the moons of Mars here are actually captured asteroids from the asteroid belt. At least that's what the sort of running hypothesis is. But this reddish brown color on the surface is caused from the oxidization of iron. So it's essentially a fancy way of saying that oxygen molecules bind to the iron in the soil or the regolith there on the surface of Mars, which is very prevalent at giving the whole planet this sort of rusty color there. Now Mars, when you look at it tonight in the sky, it's going to look a very bright red color. And that color, the brightness of it, again, is just a reflection from the sun, but the planet itself has captured the imaginations of humanity for centuries. Countless stories have been written about life existing on Mars. Mars is just outside of the habitable zone. Some estimates have it within the habitable zone ever so slightly, meaning that it could have had life on it about 3 billion years ago. And again, because of that, countless stories have been written about it. Jules Verne thought that the valleys and craters there on Mars could have been home to an ancient Martian Venetian civilization. H.G. Wells obviously wrote War of the Worlds, where the Martians came and invaded us. And Andy Weir wrote the recent book of The Martian, where an astronaut gets stranded on the surface of Mars. But last month, there was a rover that launched called Perseverance, and that is the first spacecraft of its kind ever dedicated to the search for life. So it's on its 7-month journey there right now, and if it eventually gets to Mars, successfully lands on the surface, then we will have a pretty exciting time talking about all of the things that it's going to do there and all of the science that it has on board. All right, so now finally switching over to talking about some of the constellations that we can see here. As I put on the lines and the names and the figures of these stars here, we're going to move into talking about the mythology. And if you followed this series for a while, you can know, or you probably know, that there are hundreds of constellations here from various different cultures, way more than we could ever cover in a single episode of this, or that we could cover in a live Sky Tonight show back at the museum. But the story that I'm hopefully going to try to relate to you today is of 5 constellations that we can see here in the eastern part of the sky tonight. And it's the story of Perseus and Andromeda. And so the story pretty much starts with Andromeda, who is the daughter of Cephus and Cassiopeia. And so Cassiopeia believed that she was the most beautiful woman that had ever existed, and she claimed to be more beautiful than the sea nymphs, who were essentially mermaids. And that angered Poseidon. He wasn't too happy with that, so he ended up sending this gigantic monster named Cetus that you can see in the sort of bottom right-hand side of the screen there under Pisces. He sent Cetus to go and destroy the entire domain that Cephus and Cassiopeia ruled over. And so Cassiopeia prayed to Zeus and prayed that he would save them from Poseidon wiping them out, and Zeus said that he would go and talk to Poseidon. He couldn't promise anything, but he would talk to him. And when he did that, they came to the sort of agreement that if they could have a sacrifice in place of Cassiopeia, then that might make Cetus, happy for a little while. So they offered up Andromeda, who was their least favorite daughter to begin with, but who was the most beautiful creature that there ever was. And so Perseus saw this woman chained up to a rock there, and this gigantic sea monster was coming to eat her. Now you can see that Perseus is holding a head there, and that's actually the head of Medusa. So Perseus, on his own little side quest, killed Medusa by chopping her head off, by using that shield that he's holding to sort of reflect his vision and be able to kill her, because if you look at her in her eyes, you turn to stone. And so that's what he ended up doing to kill Cetus here, was he pulled her head out of a bag and showed it to Cetus, and he looked at it and turned to stone right there. Now, the other constellation that all of this story relates to is Pegasus. Pegasus is the winged horse there just above Andromeda. And one of the most notable features that we can see, one of the easiest ones for you to spot in the sky tonight, is the square right there in the center, sometimes called the rectangle or the square of Pegasus. And similar to the other shows that we've talked about, or the other times that we've talked about in these shows, of the summer triangle, the fall square is another sort of asterism that we can see in the sky tonight. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode here, and if you did, please give it a like and share it around. And if you get a chance, come and visit us at the museum in Daytona Beach.